Welcome to Driven to Lead. I'm your host, Wayne Brandon. In this series, we explore the real world stories of key executives to find the leadership lessons that help move us all forward. If you like these conversations, we'd really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe and like button. It'll help us out a lot. But now we got another great program for you today, so let's make it happen. All right, we have a great program again today. We have Rich Brady, the Chief Executive Officer of the Society of Defense and Financial Management. SDFM is a global organization representing more than 14,000 finance and accounting professionals in government and business in the defense sector. Rich, before he joined SDFM, spent 32 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, retiring as colonel in 2021. He served in a variety of command and staff positions throughout the United States and overseas, including command of the Marine Corps Financial Management School, command of the U.S. Military Entrance Processing Command, a combat tour in Iraq, oh my goodness, multiple tours in the Pentagon, accredited diplomat in the country of Georgia as well. Today, he also serves on many chairs and global board of directors. Rather than going through all of that, I'd just like to welcome you to the program, Rich.
Fantastic. Thank you, Wayne. And thanks for reading all that out. I
Yeah.
always think it might impress my 21-year-old daughter, but maybe not, but maybe it will.
It impresses the rest of us well. And most importantly, let me start for everyone who's listening to this to thank you for your service. It's an incredible contribution you make to the country, and we really appreciate that. So I think the audience would like to hear a little bit more about the Society of Defense Financial Management. It's not something that rolls off your tongue easily or that people think about
No.
every day. What do you do, Rich?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, we're a professional association. We represent finance and accounting professionals who work in the defense sector, both on the government side and on the commercial side. On the government side, it's obviously primarily the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, the intelligence community, some Department of Veterans Affairs, and on the commercial side, it's primarily your audit advisory consulting firms. So think Big Four and the bigs and the smalls in that space, and a lot of IT firms as well, because there's a lot of work going on financial systems integrations, modernizations, that type of work. And so we find ourselves really at the intersection between government on one side, commercial on the other. We like to say we're the market maker between the two.
Yeah, and when you think of the armed forces and government, you don't typically think about accounting, but obviously it's the crux of everything and the source of everything, just like it is in a business. It's the heart of what we do.
Right. No, absolutely. And when we're talking about right now a $1.5 trillion budget request for the Department of Defense, I mean, we're talking big money, and it needs to be accounted for, just like in a business, and it needs to be invested properly in capital projects, programs, many of which, if you're talking about a shipbuilding program, it takes 10 years or more to build an aircraft carrier. And if you're talking about a next generation fighter aircraft, you could be looking at 15 to 20-year development timeline. And so all of that, again, has to be supported by the financial side on the front end, and then the audit piece on the back end. So again, we kind of find ourselves in the middle of all of that with this defense financial management workforce.
So when you were in the Marine Corps, did you interface with this organization? Was it
I,
was it
yeah.
was it an organization that you leaned on heavily? Did it help you then? What are you doing now in the organization to make sure it serves the people like you used to be?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I did. So in my time in the Marine Corps, people ask me what I did, and you always go back to your primary military occupational specialty. And so my primary military occupational specialty was financial management. But I spent in my 30 plus years in the Marine Corps, only about 10 years doing that. I spent, interestingly enough, about 10 years in school. The military is really good about education and training. And I spent about 10 years in command and other staff positions. And so from a financial management perspective, this was my professional association. I joined in the mid 90s. It was the American Society of Military Comptrollers at the time. You talk about SDFM being a mouthful. The American
Yeah.
Society of Military Comptrollers is also a mouthful. And one of the things I've done over the last 4 years is I did the rebranding, a rebranding that reflects a change in the workforce and the nature of work we do. But yeah, no, I was engaged in it throughout my career, and that's in some respects what led me to this position when I retired in 2021.
Yeah, and you're working with private sector companies as well. So you're advancing the caliber of the financial management profession across not only government, but you're looking at private sector and government simultaneously. And I expect that you constantly are going to be on the cutting edge of the capabilities that are coming forward in terms of automation and all of the things that are available now.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I found in my career in the Marine Corps was on the financial management side, most ideas around financial and accounting, transformation, modernization, they originate in the private sector and eventually make it into government. Let's be frank, government doesn't lead in this area. It's important for us to draw heavily on the private sector, and whether that's the small to mid-sized businesses where there's a lot of innovation and agility going on, and the big companies, the big four that are handling a lot of the audit work for the government. It's important for government and corporate to work together to ultimately achieve the objectives, which is advancing the mission of national security.
Yeah, yeah, very important. I'm thinking back more than 15 years now when I was CEO of a multi-billion dollar organization. And I was always concerned when we were, signing our documents and submitting them, I'd ask my CFO, how certain are we about these results? I mean, we're working across at the time 37 countries and, with lots of different, and we knew we had lots of different shortfalls in the IT systems, including the accounting capabilities. And I said, well, what confidence do we have about this? And he was a Brit. He and I always had a lot of fun, but he said, well, we've got one of the top four accounting firms in the world that are using the global best practices. And I said, okay, that makes me feel a little bit better. But what percentage of these transactions that we have, the millions and millions of transactions, do we actually audit?
Right.
And he told me a relatively small number. I don't want to say the number because people know who I work with, because we weren't being irresponsible at all, but it was a scary small number. And then he would say, well, if you find things, then you could follow those like red herrings through the data, and maybe it's a little bit better than that. But boy, I didn't have a lot of confidence that we just didn't have the capability at that time anyway to look at a lot of transactions.
Right. Yeah, no, and obviously technology is enabler of all of that now. Within the government, particularly in the Department of Defense, auditability wasn't a requirement really until the passage of the Chief Financial Officers Act in 1990, but the department really didn't start getting serious about it until about 10 or 15 years ago. But what they found is that, like the accounting systems, for example, they're all based on budgetary accounting. They weren't set up from an accrual standpoint. They weren't set up to support auditability. And so many of the services defense agencies in this transition have had to upgrade their basic accounting systems to ones that do the documentation, maintain the records, all of those things. And then you got to ask yourself the question, what's the value of knowing the depreciated value of an aircraft carrier. I mean, are we ever really going to sell it? What are we going to do with it? So, what's
Right.
relevant, what's really relevant from a defense auditability standpoint is important.
Mhm. Yeah. I just on that issue of auditability because I think it's such an important part of, accounting and financial management. I guess the amount of data we have now is really becoming so overwhelming. I mean, and the ability to organize and structure that data in a way so that it could be evaluated, even with the AI automation capabilities that we have, they still got to be a challenge.
Yeah, it is without question. You've got just the data quality issues, but then you've got because if you think of the Department of Defense or the Department of Homeland Security, you've got multiple agencies underneath there. They all, in
Mhm.
some respects, operate as their own profit and loss centers, and they all have their own separate accounting systems, their own procedures, and so aggregating that information at the highest levels is very difficult. If you were going to start from scratch, let's just like build it from the ground up, you probably wouldn't build it the way it is now. You would start with a
Right.
single accounting system, a single financial system. But we are where we are. And so,
Mhm.
whether you're talking Department of Defense or any other large organization, sometimes it's the data structure that's more important than the systems themselves. Let's make sure we're operating with a common set of, data structure so the
Absolutely.
information can be aggregated.
Right. Yeah. Because I dealt with that issue my entire career, and I think a
Yep.
lot of companies do. You have you have legacy systems. It doesn't make sense to change out and replace every legacy system all the time. The cost structure of doing that, but having uniform processes, agreed to standards, and then following through whether you have systems that support or not support, you integrate them to the best of your ability. So if you look at what you do at SDFM, I'm just wondering, what do you think would be like the key values that you're giving to your members? Education, training, setting standards, those kinds of things. I mean,
Exactly.
what would be the biggest part of the
Yeah.
value proposition for a member? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so from an individual member perspective, it's a couple things.
Hmm.
One, it's without question the education, training, and certification. It's kind of
Hmm.
the professionalization of the workforce, which is what the vast majority of the professional associations out there strive toward. The second piece is helping to drive financial transformation in the defense sector. I mean, again, that's bringing the corporate and the government together where they can talk about opportunities, solutions, risks, to move the profession forward. And finally, we help uphold the ethical standards for the profession, which again, I think for most professions is a bedrock of them. And
Hmm.
without those ethical professional standards, I mean, I'm not
Right.
sure we're even talking about a
Right.
profession. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, well said. That's great. Well, Rich, let's move into the heart of the program. We like to hear stories from key executives like yourselves. We want to learn the leadership lessons. Tell us a story. Whatever's on your mind would be good. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so thank you for this. I want to go back a little bit, a few years, and I'm going to tell you a personal story, but it's one that intersects with the professional side as well. One of the things that I found, and I've been in a leadership position for, I was just thinking this morning, 9 years now, since 2017. I came into a leadership position in the military my last 4 years, and then kind of rotated from when I retired from the Marine Corps straight into this position. So take you back to 2022. Really kind of, the height of my career. I had just retired from the Marine Corps as a colonel, had given up command of the United States Military Entrance Processing Command. I had a new job as the CEO of the Society of Defense Financial Management. I was recently selected as the chair-elect to be the incoming chair of the board of directors of the Institute of Management Accountants. Was married, had a daughter who was 17 years old, getting ready to go into her senior year of high school and doing all the college visits and everything. And so everything was moving along great. On November 17th, 2022, I was traveling. I was on travel back in the Midwest, and it was later in the evening. And I got a call from my daughter that my wife had suffered what turned out to be ventricular fibrillation arrest. And she was rushed to the hospital. Unfortunately, never regained consciousness and passed away 3 days later on November 20th, 2022.
So sorry.
And no, thank you very much. Even today, it's 3.5 years later. It's still very emotional,
Hmm.
and it's one of those things you don't expect to happen, um, but it does, and happens to everybody. And you certainly can't expect to be immune to that. And so I found myself, at one point, 24 hours prior, kind of thinking I was, at the height of, my profession and where I was
Right.
going and had a path forward and plan, and everything unraveled in an instant.
Hmm.
And so I'll pause there. I could go in a couple different directions here, wait, but I'll pause for your question.
Well, well, first of all, I mean, all of us listening to the story, I mean, it just breaks our heart to hear that kind of thing. It's such a harsh reality, but you said it correctly. We all have to deal with it at some point, and we're never ready whenever it comes. But I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But it throws me back to just a couple of weeks ago. I'm a part of an organization here in Naples called Pioneers and Legends, and we have a number of people, former executives, current executives, who get together and we share stories and we have conversations and we listen to some great speakers. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a discussion that we called Pivots and Transitions, where we just had roundtable discussions. And we talked about some of the high impact events in our lives that drove, those forks in the road, those changes that you sometimes you don't anticipate. Sometimes you have a chance to choose them. You have a chance to deliberate, gather information, and make a informed decision. And sometimes those decisions are good, and sometimes they're not. But very often, the ground is just pulled out from under your feet, and you're thrown into a situation, and you didn't have time to plan for it, and you have to react. And we talked about as leaders, how did we manage through those things? And so I guess the angle I'd like you to take is, this, you still were at the height of your career, and everything other than this situation, obviously, was running at a really nice direction. But I would be interested in how that pivot that you had to make at that point in time, made a significant difference on both the positive and the negative things that have occurred since then. Because what we find is even difficult situations also yield some good results in the future as well. So given that you're a couple of years behind that, maybe you can talk about that from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is obviously you kind of rely on your training, what got you there at the time. And in many respects, the Marine Corps training, what I learned there was very helpful in that situation. In some respects, it wasn't very helpful. On the positive side, interestingly enough, anytime you're operating in some type of a contingency operation, you've got to focus on what's important right now. What's the immediate priority? You can't be thinking like years out at that point in time. It's just
Right, of course.
you're moving from one target to the next, and so quickly I just focused down and in. I decided, hey, the number one priority is my daughter, 17 years old. She was there when it happened. She called 911. She started CPR. She witnessed everything, and that's a tough time for any 17-year-old,
Oh, yeah.
but just, with everything going on in their lives and then throw this on top. So I said, number one priority is my daughter. I've got to focus on her. And second, obviously I had to bury my wife. I had to do that and want to do that in the most respectful and honorable manner that I could. But, so everything became very narrowly focused for me. On the downside with the Marine Corps trade, Marines tend to be planners. All the military we're planners. We do a lot of planning. So throughout my career, I had always kind of been looking, 1, 3, 5 years out, 10 years out. Where do I want to be? What's the next step? And I had kind of had that in my mind, had a plan in mind, both personal and professional. And all of a sudden, as you said, that just gets ripped out from under you. Now there's no plan. And the best way I can describe it is just being placed down. Just think of it, being put out in the desert. You can see the horizon in all directions, and you're just at a crossroads. You can go in any direction, north, south, east, or west. And in some respects, it doesn't matter which direction you go. You just need to start walking. You need to take that first step.
Mhm.
You can't get bogged down. As difficult as each subsequent step is, you have to move forward. And I want to bring this back to kind of the business side,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of overlaps here. As I said, one thing you can never separate when you get in one of these leadership positions. You can't separate your personal from the professional. Your professional is going to impact your personal, and the personal is going to impact the professional. And fortunately
Absolutely.
for me, I had a strong team. I had a very supportive board of directors, understood the situation, gave me the space that I needed, and said, "Look, when you're ready, you come back." And frankly, it was about a week and a half later, 2 weeks later, I was right back in it. It was kind of like I need to get back to what's familiar. I need to get back into
Yeah.
work. I had a podcast at the time. I think 3 weeks later or 2 weeks afterwards, I was in a board meeting. We had our board meeting, and I was there for that. And
Mhm.
3 weeks later, I was taping a podcast.
Mhm.
And so you got to get back into it. You're not 100%, but again, if you've got a strong team
Right.
around you, you've got those leaders,
Yeah.
a board that understands. They're going to give you the time and space you need, and
Mhm.
that's very important. So everybody says, make sure you build a strong team, and without question, I had one of those at the most critical moment.
Yeah, I had a similar experience, not as traumatic as yours, but I had a major surgery for a grapefruit-sized tumor when I was leading some businesses. And
Yep.
uh, I don't know about you and the way you reacted to it, but I think the fact that you wanted to get back in the saddle quickly was very much what I experienced. I was so afraid. I thought this was going to take my life. And so when I realized I survived, the doctors told me I couldn't start working again, but I had to
Yeah.
start working. And I explained to them for my psychological well-being because I had to get back into it to just prove to myself that it was going to be okay, that I was going to survive, I was going to move on. So I dug back in too early. And just what a expression of human care and love in a, in more of a platonic sense that people showed toward me to take care of me. And I sense that maybe your team took care of you in that way and were very sensitive to your needs during that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, without question. And, constantly reaching out, obviously supporting, came to the funeral and everything, helping take care of my daughter, all
Hmm.
of those type of critical things. Um, but uh, a lot of people would, as I'm coming back, say, "Oh, you're doing great. You look great." And what they could see, I'd always explain to me, what you saw on the surface wasn't necessarily what was going on underneath. The way
Right.
I described it is kind of like the ocean, or like a sea. You see the calm surface, and you think, "Hey,
Right.
everything's going well." Below that, I can just tell you what you couldn't see was your turmoil, rip currents, undertows. I mean, there's just chaos
Hmm.
underneath. But you can't stop there. You go further down, and eventually you reach the bedrock, you reach the seafloor, and that's the foundation. And for me, that was as stable as it ever was. It was unmoving, unchanging, and that foundation for me, it's also the values you're brought up on. It's your
Right.
family, it's your faith, it's your friends, all of those
Yeah.
things that are going to sustain you. And in the end, they say you don't find a life, you build a life, and you build it on that foundation. And eventually, that storm that's going on above will start to subside, and you grow stronger over time, and things start to calm down overall. But it was for probably about a year and a half, a pretty chaotic time. But again, it was important to just stay in the fight, keep going in, and push through it.
I want to drill down on one thing that you said about the immediate priorities and just taking care of business. I think that is a characteristic of a leader, maybe not in as traumatic a situation always that you were dealing with, but in my leadership coaching practice, I work with executives about how do we make sure that we have the level of focus and calm in the storm that we need to have. And I've always admired the military training for that. The almost complete renewing of a mind to say, okay, when a crisis happens, my mindset must be this, and I must act with calm. I must prioritize in real time. I need to direct people. I need to handle a situation. And, I think that's such an important characteristic for a leader. And I think people who look to leaders expect that kind of response. So, not that, you're taking great pride from it, but it is something that I think the military does better than the private sector. Do you have any thoughts about that, or maybe what we can do as leaders to try to, kind of train ourselves to be more ready for these traumatic circumstances? Because sometimes it's a business event. Maybe,
Right.
it's a new product that comes on the market, a new competitor just blows us out of the water with a price point that we can't hit, and we're going to be dead in the water there. I mean, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I got to start by telling a quick story. It was 2009. I was just selected to take battalion level command in the Marine Corps. And so I was working in the Pentagon, getting ready to transfer down to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And I was a lieutenant colonel at the time. And this Marine colonel pulled me aside, who'd been in command, the battalion level. And he said, "Hey," he said, "Rich, just remember when you get that call in the middle of the night, just remember it's not as good as it first sounds, and it's not as bad as it first sounds." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to tuck that one away, and I'll keep that with me." And
Mhm.
and sure enough, about a year later, I think it was a Friday night, Saturday night. I was asleep around 11:30 at night. Phone rings, and it's my sergeant major, and he says, "Hey, sir, I'm going to let you. I need to get some information to you. I'm going to let you go into your office and sit down, get a piece of paper out, get ready to write some stuff down. So I'll give you a minute." And as I'm, kind of stumbling through the house in the dark, trying to get to the
Yeah.
office. I'm thinking, what's the first thing that comes back into my mind is what that colonel
Yeah.
told me. It's like, just remember, it's not as bad as it first sounds, and it's not as
Right.
good as it first sounds. And so,
Yeah.
I walk in, and it was pretty ugly. We had some Marines who
Hmm.
were out in town, had a little too much to drink, got in some
Hmm.
fights. I think we had
Yeah.
one or two in the hands of civilian authorities, one or two in the hands of military authorities, one or two at the
Mm.
hospital on base, and then the barracks was
Oh
on
my.
lockdown. And it's like, okay, I think I've got the situation. Let's go in, let's work through it. And so I think the
Mm.
lesson, one, it really is never as bad as it first sounds, and never as good as it first sounds. But more important than that, it's not important necessarily what happens. It's your reaction to what happens that's most important.
Hmm.
Because bad things are
Got it.
going to happen to every leader. You're going to have a
Yeah.
bad day. Something's going to happen. Things that are completely out of your control, many times. It's what you do afterwards that really makes the difference. And it's about sitting down, find out what's going on, putting together a plan and executing and just keeping that
Hmm.
positive attitude. Leadership
Right.
requires a tremendous amount of resiliency because I mean every day you can be bogged down, consumed with all the bad things out there. But you got to stay positive to keep your team positive, to keep the people around you positive.
Hmm.
And so much of it again comes down to that attitude, not necessarily worrying about what happened. It's as we'd say on the rifle range. Once you fire a shot, that's a round down range. You can't bring it back, but you can focus on the next target and always keep
Yes,
focusing on what you can
exactly.
do. Yeah,
Yeah, and just one more thing on this, that there's something about the folks who are leaders in the military that's always impressed me, and that is they seem to integrate the things they know, the things that they know they should do, better than some people who don't have that military background. Let me give you just a quick example. So, there's great leadership books written on the intentional leadership and how we should behave. And I think most of us who are leaders know what we should do, but we don't necessarily become the person in real time that can react to situational realities with that kind of deployment of the intention. So the deployment of the correct behaviors. There's a lot of things that get in the way. And when I work with executives, we work on everything from how we manage our emotions, how we manage our own ego, how we manage our own aspirations, how we manage our own resistance to change, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems to me that with all of the work that we can do and all the improvements we can make, the folks who have that military training seem to be able to actually uh, execute, deploy a better response more often, not always, of course, but more often than I see for people without that training. Can you talk to me about why that might be the case, or if you think it's the case, first of all, and then why it might be?
I do think that's generally the case. And I'm thinking back to, the Marine Corps leadership traits and principles, and all the services have them. But one of them is, know yourself and seek self-improvement. And so there's always this kind of constant critical assessment of ourselves. Like, how did I do? At night, you're sitting there and you're like, how did I do today? What decisions went well, which didn't? I mean, let's be honest, we're all human. We all make mistakes.
Hmm.
And for me, one of frankly, the toughest times in the military was during the COVID pandemic. I was commander of U.S. MEPCOM. Policies were changing, regulations were changing, guidance was changing every hour, and you're trying to make decisions to keep up with them. And every night I'd go home and I'd sit back and I'd be like, man, let me go through some of the decisions today. How many did I get right? How many did I get wrong? And if on par, I got 51% of them right, then that was a good day. I mean, it was just such a difficult
Yeah.
situation. But again, you can't let that get to you. Just say, okay, I'll get back into it tomorrow, and I'm going to try to do a better job tomorrow, and just keep plugging at it. So I think that's a lot of it is that constant self-assessment, but also giving yourself whatever you want to call it, a little grace, a little allowance for being human, and sometimes not responding in the way that you'd want to. We're all emotional
Yes.
and everything, and we can all learn from that, and again, just strive to do better the next time.
I was smiling when you were saying that because it's so much aligned with the path that I work in my leadership training. And so I'm very pleased to hear you say that. You first need to be incredibly self-aware. You need to put the mirror up and say, all right,
Yep.
where are my blind spots? Let someone else help me get there. Let me work on those things. And rather than just accepting that they're there, be willing to set them aside, set triggers that will cause you to notice them quickly and then have a better plan already designed, ready to put in. And then with that better plan over time, you can self-assess every day. What did I do right today? What did I do wrong today? I love what you just said about that because that's exactly the construct I think we need. And then the last point you made, also very rich. Give yourself some grace. I have trouble sleeping sometimes because I have a lot of things going on. Maybe others have that as well. But a part of the thing that helps me is I do the self-assessment. What did I mess up today? How can I improve that tomorrow? Forgive myself as quickly as I forgive others, and then try to be better tomorrow and give myself a little bit of credit for what I did right. And then lay my head on my pillow without any worries or cares and just say, I'm going to do better tomorrow. And that seems like it's enough. And I think as a leader, if we can get to that place with all of the pressures coming down on us, with all the things going in our personal lives and our professional lives, and if we can do that, I think we'll be better leaders. And I really appreciate you sharing that story and giving that advice.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't say that I've always been like this. I've always tried to improve myself. Obviously, the situation that happened with my wife back in 2022 was also a profound turning point for me. As you said, kind of a mindset pivot in many respects. The things I knew, but this really kind of drove it home. And I've told some people, I said, when you're sitting there or standing there, next to a hospital bed, holding the hand of your loved one, and you realize there's nothing you can do. All of the promotions, all of the accolades, all the awards, all the money in the world can't change what's going to happen here. It really kind of puts
Hmm.
everything in perspective. And I don't want to say that, I've got hey, I just don't give a whatever attitude. It's not
Hmm.
that. It's just really keeping things in perspective.
Hmm.
You probably heard the poem, Rudyard Kipling's poem, If, there's a great
Hmm.
line in that, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those imposters just the same, then, the
Hmm.
world is
Hmm.
yours and
Hmm.
everything in it, and I think
Right.
that's very true. Like,
Yeah.
nothing is permanent, nothing is lasting forever again, whether those great things that happen to you in life or the terrible things, it's
Mhm.
and so it just kind of helps keep all of that in perspective. And for
Yeah.
some of us Marines that are a little hard of learning, sometimes we need like a stick over the head to teach us, and so that's
We all
that's
do.
yeah.
Rich, we all need it. It's not just Marines. So
Yes.
hey, let's as we wrap up our conversation, let's talk about what advice you'd give your younger self. Let's rewind 30 years or more. You think about a time in your younger life when you could sure use a piece of advice that you know now that you didn't know then.
Yeah, I would say probably the number one thing is lean in and leave it all on the playing field.
Hmm.
I've told some people this story as well. When I was a company commander out at Camp Pendleton, I was a captain, and usually you're in company command for 24 months. Unfortunately, I only got 12 months because fortunately I was selected to go get a master's degree at the Naval Postgraduate School. So I was leaving for good reasons, but I was short-toured as a company commander. And I remember that night after I turned over command, I went out to dinner. Was out to dinner with my wife, and I just had this. All of a sudden, it was overcome by this kind of sinking feeling, like, oh man, I I could have done a lot more, but I thought I had 24 months. Ended up only getting 12. Man, I wish I had leaned in more. I wish I had done more. You never know when you're going to run out of time, and so
Yeah.
I've always told all commanders from that point on, like, look, leave it all out there. You
Hmm.
don't want to have that feeling that I had at that moment on that night at dinner, where you just got this sinking feeling of regret that, man, you gave up an opportunity because you don't know when you're going to get. Fortunately, I had battalion command, regimental
Yeah.
command, many other opportunities, but
Many other
that,
opportunities.
that
Yeah.
might be your last one. So take the risk, take the job, take the date, take
Yeah.
the overseas assignment, get out of your comfort zone and just leave it all out on the playing field.
I think that's tremendous advice. And I think we all are well served by being as passionate and as dedicated to whatever cause we're working on. I always told my kids when they were growing up, just be the best expression of yourself in everything you do every day, and you'll never regret it. And so, love that advice you give yourself. And thanks for sharing that with the audience. Okay, one more question. You and I are having a beer 20 years from now, and we're talking about our lives, our careers, our accomplishments. What are you going to tell me you're most proud of, Rich?
Yeah, there's three things that I'm most proud of. Number one, being a husband. Number two, being a father. And number three, being a Marine.
Mhm.
This is to me the core. That relationship you have with your spouse. I mean, it affects everything, to how you raise your
Mhm.
kids, to how you perform on the job. And so, first and foremost, I do want to be a good husband. And a good news story, I was just to get remarried about 3 months ago. And
Oh,
so
congratulations.
no, thank you very much. And so
Yeah,
I'm incredibly fortunate, incredibly blessed in my life, and blessed with the love of another beautiful woman. And so I want to be the best husband I can. As a father, I mentioned I've got a 21-year-old daughter, and
hmm,
a great relationship there. She's doing great as well. But that's the future, that's the legacy, and I want to
sure.
give her every opportunity advantage that she can have in life. And then finally, the Marine Corps, obviously, that's central to who I am. It really it brought me out of a kind of a small town in Kansas, gave me an opportunity to learn leadership, to learn management, to put myself in those uncomfortable situations and challenge myself to really find out my full
Hmm.
potential. I always want to live up to those ideals that the Marine Corps instills in us. So those are the three things, Wayne: husband,
Yeah,
father, and Marine. In
can't
in
can't
that
beat it.
order, those are my priorities.
Yeah, can't beat it. I think that's fantastic. The only thing I would add to those, because I have those same values, is my faith as well. And you mentioned it earlier
Yes,
as well. And so
yes,
those those things are paramount. And I think if we're as excellent as we can be in those areas, basically our stewardship to our families and our stewardship to our organizations, I think we're going to be very proud of that. And so I'd agree with you.
absolutely.
Thank you so much today, Rich, for sharing so much about yourself, for being vulnerable and telling a personal story. Thank you for telling us that you were remarried again, because I wanted to ask that because I saw a wedding ring, but I didn't want to ask it in case you were still wearing
Yeah,
the wedding ring from
yeah,
before, and that would have been really sad. So thanks for sharing that with us. That kind of
absolutely.
lifted up that sadness I was feeling from your story. And so if I'm sure the audience got as much out of this as I did in talking with you. And I'm sure that some people would like to get in touch with you, maybe your organization. If they wanted to do that, what would they do?
Yeah, just go out to www.sdfm.org or look me up on LinkedIn. I'm out there on LinkedIn and happy to connect with anybody out there and would love to continue the conversation. And thank you, Wayne. I really appreciated the opportunity to sit down and talk to you today.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. And I wish you all the best in the future. I certainly hope that you and I will stay in touch as well. So we'll wrap it there. And all the best and God bless. Well, that's it for Driven to Lead today. We really appreciate you being with us. Share this with a friend or a business colleague if you would. And if I could remind you again, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. We're very grateful for that. So until next time, always remember the high road leads to a better place.